Hi, I'm Zach Waters, and welcome to another episode of WTF-STOP Photo Talk, where I chat to photographers about their life and connection to the world through photography. Christopher Morris is an acclaimed American photojournalist, internationally recognized for his fearless documentation of war, politics, and power, as well as for his often surreal style fashion photography. A founding member of Seven Photo Agency, Christopher has covered more than 18 armed conflicts around the world, often working independently and at great personal risk on the front line in places like Manila, Panama, Croatia, Chechnya, Somalia, Iraq, and Yemen, to name but a few. Christopher has helped shape the visual language of war reporting throughout the 90s and early 2000s. In our chat, we went in quite deep with the psychology and trauma of working in a conflict and crisis zone.
I made it into my little hut where I was going to sleep, this little mud building room. I had a room in there with Enrico, and I made myself a little stove, and I cooked myself some instant oatmeal. And in the morning, there was a crowd of people that sat outside my hut. When I say a crowd, I don't know, 10 or 15. In the morning, when I got up to go out, they were dead. They were dead. So here I'm waiting for the wheelbarrow guy, with a UNICEF wheelbarrow guy, to come up and collect the dead in the pile. Some of them are still alive, but they're dead. Their eyes are open. They're covered in flies. And then when I remember one point, I had this girl, she wouldn't let go of my pants. She would not let go of my pants. I couldn't walk. She had like a death grip on my pants. And I had to peel her fingers off my pants and walk away. And I never, ever, ever wanted to do that again. And I told time I would never photograph famine ever again.
His commitment to bearing witness even under the most harrowing conditions has earned him numerous awards, including the Robert Capa Gold Medal and multiple World Press of Photo Awards. In a dramatic shift from frontline conflict to frontline of American politics in the early 2000s, he became Time magazine's official White House photographer during the George W. Bush administration. This phase of his career led to the publication of My America in 2006, a seemingly ironic and at times surreal portrait of American political theatre, military spectacle, and cultural contradiction. He followed this with Americans in 2012, which is a continuation of his exploration into the symbols, rituals, and the contradictions of American patriotism and identity.
I would listen to a lot of music too. In the times you're covering certain things, I wear headphones. It's like I put myself into a film. I became fascinated with this whole thing of, you're trying to trap a viewer. Okay. You want them to stop on your image. You have to trap them. So you have to trap them with composition. If you leave, you have to build some kind of circular movement through the frame that's not going to allow the viewer to want to leave. Even if it's a picture of a coffee cup next to on a table, you can trap the viewer with you look at Eggleston, you look at the simplicity, Larry Sultan, he has a picture of his parents, there's a picture of his mother's hand on the wallpaper. That picture makes me cry. I can stare at it and cry. And it's just a picture of a hand on a wallpaper. I really love that in photography. I love that where you can, and then to try to get a message across, but my message is not necessarily your message. You want people to kind of feel and go through the image.
Beyond the conflict and political zones, Christopher has built a parallel career in fashion and as a filmmaker and director, working with top designers like Karl Lagerfeld and publications like Vogue magazine. Christopher's ability to cross boundaries from conflict zones, the Oval Office, to avant-garde fashion spreads makes him one of the most versatile and provocative photographers of his generation. Both his still and moving image work continues to challenge viewers to question the nature of truth, image making, and the spectacle of modern life. I've followed Christopher's work since the 1990s, when he had already established a formidable reputation as a conflict photographer, had earned him World Press Photo Awards and significant recognition. And later during his time photographing in the White House, it became clear that he was operating at the very height of his profession, a photographer not only documenting history, but helping to define how it would be remembered. From a distance, I admired his work deeply, though I never quite knew how to approach him or whether he would be open to any conversation. He gave me the impression of someone highly self-contained and not easily accessible to those outside his immediate circle. However, as I came to know him better, I discovered someone who was not only exceptionally intelligent and perceptive, but also remarkably kind and sincerely committed to the subjects and stories he has spent his career capturing.
Empathy is weakness. Empathy is weakness. We're taught that empathy is wrong. That's the problem. That to me is the key. Raise your children with utmost of empathy of others. I have empathy for Trump people. I have empathy for people I don't like. I have empathy for the killer that was next to me that took somebody's life, that how he ended up with such hatred that he could kill his neighbor. You know, there's such hatred of others. Don't like fat people. Don't like trans people. Who cares? Who cares? Let everybody be, leave them alone, you know.
We covered a wide range of topics in our conversation, from his ongoing efforts to archive his extensive body of work with the help of AI.
Who I am and what I was doing, because it's interesting. I've been working with AI where it analyzes my work. Originally analyzes the work without any information, no contextual information of what it's looking at, just to challenge it, to see if it can pinpoint. It's quite fascinating. And it's also been directed to ask me questions about my work. And these questions that AI ask me are quite challenging. And at one point I had to stop because I realized the answers I will give, I don't want to be training something on the craft of photojournalism, because my methods, just because they're my methods, doesn't make them sound methods that I want to be training people on. The interesting thing is the craft of photojournalism, to do it on the level that I was doing it at and still attempt to do it at, is you're trying to get into places that nobody wants you. Nobody wants to be photographed, especially war criminals. It's why, like in Gaza now, they don't want any outside observers. Governments and societies take great pains in hiding their dirty deeds. So as a photographer, to penetrate that, it's kind of like you have to put yourself kind of like in a Graham Greene novel or an Ian Fleming novel.
And to his working practices as a photojournalist.
And what they want was a very formulated thing. You go into a country, an example, my first country. It's the method for photojournalism. You can apply it even today. This is a good learning tool. It's what Susan Meiselas did in Nicaragua. It's a formula where you pick a region in the world that has some kind of peg. And for me, it's easy to peg to America because we have over 100 territories around the earth. America is everywhere. So all you have to do is pick a region. I picked the Philippines. It has a dictator, martial law. It has U.S. military presence, and it has a communist and an Islamic insurgency, all on an island. So embed yourself early, document that place for 2 or 3 years. And when I say document it, you first research, you pick the anniversaries in that country. When is their Independence Day? What are their military anniversaries? What are that? Because that's when you can go up and you go in and you go to these events and you can photograph the heads of states, the generals, all the top leaders in the society go to these events, military parades. You arm yourself with a 302A with a teleconverter so you can do headshots of Noriega or Putin or whatever. It's the kind of pictures that Salgado's not doing. It's the kind of pictures Noctway is not doing. It's the kind of pictures Gil Perez is not doing. These are pictures that you need to, it's what the magazines want. They want headshots. So you apply this formula to a country And you do it from the top down. You do it to all the way down to the poorest of the poor, the people that are picking in the garbage dumps. You go to the polo clubs. You document the polo clubs. You meet people.
As he revisits his archive, he continues to grapple with the psychological impact of those experiences, including the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I was so happy that he took the time out to talk to me before he headed off in his next venture. So the day came, and I asked him what he was up to.
I'm still, even though of my age and how long I've been in the industry, I'm still a working photographer. I think people that do this profession or this craft, there's never been into my mindset of the term retirement. There is no retirement. It's just a point you go until your body physically can no longer continue to work. So yeah, where do I begin? I've had a long 40-year career. I can tell you what I'm working on now, and it basically was kickstarted when COVID came. So what is that now? Like 4 or 5 years ago, almost 4 years ago. Prior to that, I was always working. I'm based here in Florida. I had left New York in the 90s, 94 to be exact, because it just became untenable, the cost. I was only there maybe a month a year. I spent around 11 months a year traveling. So I had to get out. I was basically working in Europe. But long story short, I ended up in Florida where I grew up, in a very odd place, Tampa, Florida, a place I never wanted to be. Ended up raising a family here and stuff while I work. But since COVID, it forced me into this kind of like an isolation of where I was. And I never was happy with here. I never liked living here. Built my own little like private Idaho of a house and a place to, maintain my archives and stuff and have my family and raise my kids. But it's a place I don't like. I don't like Florida, and I actually don't like this country. Especially over the last 10, 15 years, the veneer of who we are as a nation and as a people has been truly exposed. And I don't like it. And being in Florida, I'm in the epicenter of it, in that new political environment in our country. So, long story short, COVID came and I was just preparing. I just got back from several overseas trips. I was in Bangladesh and was in Nepal. I came back right when COVID started, and I had already started. The Seven Foundation was very interested in my Yugoslav archives, and with Gary Knight, we had discussed. They had got these scanner setups with the new Fuji thing, and they had started. They sent me this whole scanner setup, this close to $20,000 kit, to start scanning my Yugoslav, and at first I have to understand how my archive is kept and managed. It was stuff that I never looked at. People have to understand I had spent, especially in the film days, I would go from story to story. And when I would come back to New York and I'd come back to Time and to Black Star, they would have they had edited out of the material, my selects or whatever. And I would only kind of look at the selects and I would move on. And basically, long story short, over the long career, I never went back and looked at my material. All I knew is what were selected for me by editors, usually 2 editors, one at Time, one at Black Star. And it was real traumatic for me to look at my work. I didn't realize, I've had all this material in my home for all these years, and I never looked at any of it. The only work I would look at was my Chechen work. The Chechen work, because it was easy to look at because it was on contact sheets. It wasn't, and work prints that Time would print. And it was work that I was the most proud of in my career. And I can go into later why that is, because I've covered so many different conflicts. So there was I knew what my work was, but I kind of blocked it out into my mind because so much of my work dealt with, tragedy of societies and mankind dealing with war. So here's this whole COVID thing. I had some people that I knew that had passed away that were my age, that people that end up in hospitals and don't get to see their kids or whatever. And I realized, whoa, shit, I could die. I could die tomorrow. We all have that. I understood the fear of that initial COVID. But then I realized, oh shit, I can't die. What about all these boxes? What about all this material that's just going to end up in a garbage dump? So I set about trying to, since that time, of organizing my archives, turning down a lot of work, not covering stuff that's happening, because at one point I realized I can keep taking pictures. But at one point, what's the purpose? What's the purpose if all this work is just going to end up in a landfill or something, or just lost to time? So I've been trying to balance, in these last years, organizing these archives to get everything scanned. And I'll go into a little bit in that in a second of what I'm doing and who I'm working with on that. But then I still had to work, because I can't just not work. I have to have income. I take certain assignments still and continue to work. So that's kind of what I'm doing. And the thing is, the project I'm doing now, I'm not working for editorial clients. I mean, some of them, I have a grant. The problem is with the work now is projects you work, you can't post anything. You can't, if you're on long projects, the understanding is I can't put any of that work to show my current work, because you can't, no one will know. I'm doing a long thing on the environment. I have a grant here in Florida on the, sea level rise and the storms. And, I can't really share any of it, because then you can't, it destroys the value of that product that you're trying to produce and eventually market. You'll never be able to sell it if you're already posting it, so, and then also doing a lot of, I've worked on some documentaries, some film work. I worked on a wonderful thing on Palm Beach County, where Trump is, and Mar-a-Lago, and everything from the billionaires down to the street crime and the immigrants of the county. It's a mind-boggling county when you understand it's the billionaires, and then you just go over, even from where Trump and Jeffrey Epstein lived, you just go over to Belglade, cross that same county, and it's one of the poorest counties in the nation. So, but I worked on it as a photographer and as a cameraman. And I shot and I was able to shoot it in my way. But the problem is, I don't own it. I can't show it. And I find it very frustrating to work on documentaries or stuff where you're hired as a camera operator. I find that extremely frustrating, because you give them all your creativity and you get all the things that and learn and how to get access and all that, and you can't do anything with it. And so I prefer working more on a personal project. That's kind of where I am right now. I'm deep. What's kind of controversial, several years ago, I was contacted by Kira Pollack. Kira Pollack was a former director of photography at Time magazine when I was there. And she started there, I think, 2009, 2010. And then eventually she left, and now she's been doing stuff with academia. And she contacted me about my archive, because she had heard I was trying to do something. And what I've done, Zach, is I'm trying to make something that's a little more than just a traditional archive. I started on my Yugoslavia, but I stopped when Russia invaded Ukraine, because I realized I had such a Russian archive. Basically starting in 1990, when it was still the Soviet Union. And working from Time, I was able to shoot a lot of film. I didn't have the thing is about my archives. It was completely funded and supported by Time magazine. So I didn't have the restrictions that other photographers that had when I worked. They would show up they were lucky if they could have 40 rolls of film, 50 rolls of film. When you work for an organization like Time, it's basically unlimited. So you had the freedom to produce a lot of material. Not that I overshot. A good day in the analog time, if you shot 10 rolls on a day on an event, that's a good day. But if you think about it in digital term, that's only 360 pictures. What I've done is I've been focusing back with Kira on this thing. I'm trying to create what's called a living archive. So I had scanned initially close to 10,000 images from I scanned all my Chechen works, all the black and white names, every frame. And then I went through and I started scanning all my Russia work. And I stopped at around 1,000 transparencies. And then I ran into here's the kind of like major hiccup when you're dealing with large archives is the keywording and captioning. I couldn't wrap my head around how I was going to do this. But lo and behold, around 2 years ago, with the advent of AI, everything has changed, and I'm able to now utilize this vision of how I want to do my archive. Because what had happened with Gary when he first asked me to scan my material is when I went and opened up these folders. Now, people have to understand, I've had these folders in filing cabinets that are labeled. I had never looked at these folders. I had never gone into my filing cabinets until just recently, until just a few years ago. And it's like opening up the brain, because you have to understand every one of these images. I was there. I was standing on this square meter patch of earth in some society, trying to capture supposed reality with some chemical process of film. And now that film I'm looking at on a light table, and it opens up the mind. It's like a door to the mind. And I realized that I need to record myself, because if I would wait and say, I'll write a caption later, I realize now with the way we can have with cameras and audio that I need to be telling the viewer what they're looking at, why I took the picture, what film I used, why I shot black and white, why that, what gave me permission to stand over. I mean, this is interesting. So with Kira, we started working on all this stuff. We've been working with different institutions from Harvard and different science labs, Stanford and different things. She's bringing in different people to try to formulate what we can do with AI and trying to help create these living archives. And she's been using me as a test case for the last couple of years. But for me, it's this way of creating a living archive. And also what I discovered is we have something that's called rejects, the returns. So if I ship my film, let's say I'm in Yugoslavia or Sarajevo, and I ship my film, my 40 rolls to New York, I'm never going to see that film, maybe 3-4 months later. But what happens is an editor at time will look through that film and he'll take out what he needs. So if one roll of 36 exposures, he maybe only takes out 5 pictures. It also depends on what the story is for that week. What I discovered is in these returns, these unseens, and this wasn't discovered until this last hurricane last year, a year ago, when I had 2 hurricanes that were going to basically potential of taking everything away with it, because I live near the sea, which is not good for hard drives or material. What I discovered in opening up these boxes, they weren't rejects. They aren't outtakes. They're a complete take they're these transparency, beautifully exposed Fujichrome professional slide film. It's like movie film. And when you start sequencing and feeding it through, I realized everything has to be scanned. If I had started this process of editing during COVID of these rejects, these outtakes, 80% of it would have went into the trash can, because that's the way you edit. You just don't have the means to store and archive all that. So right now I'm heavy in the Yugoslavia. I've consolidated all the Time Black Star returns and eliminated all the dupes. Duplicates are when you had the original. Black Star would make a story and send it to their foreign clients, foreign agents, be it like in London, maybe Network, and you had Grazia Neri in Italy. Black Star had 18 sub-agents. So of a story they might make, let's say a 20 image story, they'll make 18 sets of that. So I had to purge my filing cabinets. Now just on Yugoslavia of just all the duplicates and just narrow it down to originals. What I've uncovered is I have around 30,000 original on file chromes from Yugoslavia. Now this is without, I call them AOUs, archive, original, unseen. This is all the stuff I'm having to sleeve. And what's interesting is the timestamps, because now AI can read it. It can see the image. It can see the slide mount. It can write the caption. I'm in this process of recording my voice and building this living archive. So it's quite fascinating. It's right there. And what I've discovered, though, is that there is a lot of trauma involved with it. And that's what Kira's involved is especially when you're dealing with the type of work we're doing. We're dealing with conflict photography, which is actually going to bring me to a shift in the conversation of what I've also discovered in looking at my pictures and having me to analyze who I am and what I was doing. Because it's interesting. I've been working with AI where it analyzes my work. Originally analyzes the work without any information, no contextual information of what it's looking at, just to challenge it, to see if it can pinpoint. It's quite fascinating. And it's also been directed to ask me questions about my work. And these questions that AI ask me are quite challenging. And at one point I had to stop because I realized the answers I will give, I don't want to be training something on the craft of photojournalism, because my methods, just because they're my methods, doesn't make them sound methods that I want to be training people on. The interesting thing is the craft of photojournalism, to do it on the level that I was doing it at and still attempt to do it at, is you're trying to get into places that nobody wants you. Nobody wants to be photographed, especially war criminals. It's why, like in Gaza now, they don't want any outside observers. Governments and societies take great pains in hiding their dirty deeds. So as a photographer, to penetrate that, it's kind of like you have to put yourself kind of like in a Graham Greene novel or an Ian Fleming novel. And everything is off the tables. Because for me, I'm dealing with governments and societies that are doing criminal things that involve rape and murder and genocide. So for me, there are no rules and there are no laws in the sense of how I'm going to penetrate to try to document. So I can't be explaining these methods and things I do to AI. You see my point? It's not like something I want to be discussing and having it read through. Even one of the questions I was asked, it was a picture of, in Sarajevo, some dead children in the morgue, one of my most traumatic experiences. And one of the questions it asked me was, who gave me permission? It's a powerful question. What gave me the right to stand over these children and photograph them? And, interesting. There's a lot to discuss, a lot to talk about.
Something you said matter-of-factly there about COVID and the realization that you could die because your friend
mortality
died. Yeah, but did you ever think that in the decade you were being a war photographer?
It was more than a decade. It was more than.
No, I know.
And that's kind of where I would like to. I need to get back to what my generation was and who I am, and this is something I've never really talked about.
Were you never injured or anything either?
Yeah, I've been injured, but I've never been impacted directly by where a bullet's penetrated me or anything like that. But I've been banged up and scarred, yes. But never, I've been very fortunate. I'd like to kind of get off of that, which will lead me to what made me, or created in me this desire to want to document conflict.
Yeah.
It's something that actually started quite young in my youth. I'll just give a background. So my generation, you have to understand, I was born in 1958. So that's a long time ago. But to make me feel better, it was the same year Madonna and Michael Jackson were born. It was kind of an amazing generation. We grew up in the 60s. You have to understand, think if you're born in 58, by the time you're 63, when Kennedy's killed, you're just going into kindergarten, first grade, you got the Beatles, everything music. And if you look at everything that was happening in the world in 68, but I was growing up in Tampa, Florida. I was going to a Catholic Irish school. My mother, who was Italian in heritage, had married my father, ran away with my father when she was 16. My father was in the Air Force initially for 2 years. He went out of high school in I think 56. And in 58, he got out of my parents got married, I think, in like 57, 56 or something like that. She was like 17 or something. 2 years in the Air Force, he was immediately hired by the Raytheon Corporation. People don't know what the Raytheon Corporation is. It's one of America's biggest weapons providers. My father immediately was assigned to their air-to-air weapons systems because they realized that they had a new fighter plane coming out called the F-4 Phantom that was going to be deployed on an aircraft carrier, which he deployed on the Kitty Hawk. So long story short, my father ended up getting deployed to Asia during Vietnam, originally to Japan, and he would go into Thailand and the Philippines because the war was starting up. We're talking early 60s. And he was originally working with naval aviators that were doing bombing runs onto Vietnam. And he worked directly with the pilots. So in 1969, so as I got older, my father wanted to move us to Japan, and my mother refused to move. And for other reasons, they got divorced. But I ended up going to the Philippines at 9-10 years old. In 1969, I first went to the Philippines. Flew unaccompanied with my sister from Florida via Chicago, overnight in Tokyo. Now we're talking 11 and 10-year-old kids flying unaccompanied to the Philippines. But whatever, I'll try to make this, how this is all relevant. But you have to understand, this is at the height of the Vietnam War, and my father is involved with the pilots. Now the pilots the Americans weren't winning this. The North Vietnamese had these MiGs, and they were destroying this Phantom aircraft. The Phantom aircraft didn't even have a gun on it. It only had missiles. And the missiles were my father's missiles, the Sparrows and these Sidewinders. And on today's dollars, these missiles were, I haven't done the math or gone in and done inflation, were probably upwards of $200,000 a missile. Each missile. But the success rate, and you can go out, it's all been declassified, of these missiles was only 5%. Now you think about that. You're going to shoot 100 of these missiles and only 5 of them are going to work in terms of leaving the plane. So there was a lot of pressure on my father to figure out what was going on with these things. And I understand that now because a lot of stuff has been declassified. I understand the pressures that my father was under. But my father, when I went to live over there, what I discovered was, and I didn't understand that in my youth, I didn't start to realize it until I was 19 and after high school, and I went back there. But when I was there, I went to Clark Air Base to a DOD school as 8th grade to live there for a year. And it was the first time I had been pulled out of a private school into a public military school on the military base. There were black kids, there were Asian kids, there were Jewish kids. I had none of that before. So it kind of like opened my eyes. And what really happened was after school, my father lived off base in this huge compound. Very colonialist existence. He had a rank of like a colonel, so we had all the officer clubs, you have that maids, the whole servitude of society. What was happening was when I was off of school, I had no chaperone. I would take the bus, go out the main gate, and I would get in what's called it's called a tricycle. It's a motorcycle with a side cab, and I would go home. But you have to understand, if you think of Vietnam, Saigon in the 70s and the 60s, what is happening on outside of a military base? It is a den of criminality. It's again a den of pedophilia and prostitution everywhere around. 360 degrees outside of any military installation was prostitution. It's been documented in films, but I grew up around that. And when I was after school, I became friends with the tricycle drivers, these 18, 19-year-old things. And they had a value in me because a value in me was the commodities that I could buy on base and that my father could buy. So I used to steal packs of cigarettes and I would sell a pack of cigarettes. Now this is 1972, in the Philippines, 73, for $10, one pack. Now think about that. That's a lot of money because off base cigarettes were counterfeit. They weren't real. The Marlboro, my father had real, and it had the tax stamps. So my father would buy them by the cases because you go to the BX and he would store them. So I would steal. And with that, I would hire, and basically, but long story short is I discovered a people that were being shit on by a society that used them as basically slaves and treated them as slaves. I remember the bit about you don't want to spoil the economy, meaning you don't want to pay them too much because you'll spoil the economy. Whenever my father would catch me giving somebody money, he said that it doesn't help because you're ruining the economy. A very kind of colonialist upbringing. And what I was exposed to was in the newspaper, the daily newspaper was arriving pictures from Vietnam. Now, these are the Stars and Stripes was a military newspaper. It came in every day. But in there, every morning I would see pictures from Vietnam. And at night, my father would have pilots that have just come from Vietnam. I'm talking majors, colonels, captains, lieutenants, and they would talk about their friends. He knew 20, 30 POWs, and I was even there when the POWs were released, and my father knew a lot of them. And that's also when I first discovered a photographer was during when the POW was released. I came to Clark Air Base, and my father had access to the pilots, and there were all these press photographers. The David Burnett tiles and the 5 cameras and all that. And it clicked to me then as a child. Those are the guys that take the pictures that I've been looking in the paper. Prior to that, I always thought it was soldiers that took the pictures, which a lot of them were, because they would just, and the Stars and Stripes, it was mainly UPI or it'd be an Army photograph. But there was one specific photo that profoundly affected my childhood and my fascination is I saw a photograph from Vietnam and it had like 3 or 4 American soldiers standing in this kind of like muddy field, almost like on the side of a river, surrounded by another 10 or 15 South Vietnamese soldiers. But this group did not look like a normal group of people. They looked wild. The American soldiers, their bandanas, their weapons, their faces, and at their feet were heads. There were heads at their feet, and behind them was like a pile of bodies. And I stood there and I looked at that, and I realized I'm like 11, 12 years old. And it's like, whoa, what is that? What is that? What is that? So later in life, and also it's something very interesting at the time. A movie was being made at the time while I was there, and it was called Apocalypse Now by Francis Ford Coppola. And it was being made very near by where we lived. And my father and his friends were always talking about it, this leftist anti-war movie that was going to be coming out. You have to understand Jane Fonda and all those people, they came and protested. I was surrounded by these hawks, these, defending the world from communism, listening to them talk. But then I was being exposed to the people, and it was just formulating my eyes. So growing up, and then the film came out and I saw Apocalypse Now in New York City. I think it came out in 79. I saw it in New York City at the Ziegfeld. My father hated it, but I was kind of like, I was mesmerized, and I became mesmerized about that scene with Dennis Hopper and the heads. And I went back to the Philippines in 1981 to go visit my father. My father was going to get remarried, and I was already like interning at Black Star, and I was going to start working. It just so happened to be playing in the Philippines, and I went and I watched that thing like 15 times, 20 times. But about the dialogue.
Was it the romanticism of it, or?
No. Yeah, it was the romanticism. It's like, well, how do you put yourself as a photographer next to society, to killers, to psychopaths, and come out of that? How do you do that? How do you do that? That was the question. That's heavy. So in my mind, it was this kind of like that Joseph Conrad, that Heart of Darkness. And you listen to the dialogue, you can pull up the dialogue of the Marlon Brando, Colonel Curtis, and he talks about the snail, where man goes, where he's walking on the razor edge, and which leads me now to what I've discovered was I found it. And I found it on November 18th in 91 in Vukovar. I found that man. I stood next to executioners, and then I wanted off. Now you have to understand, I spent the 80s grooming myself for this. And ironically, I can't tell as a kid, I want to be a war photographer. My father wanted me to go to the Air Force Academy. They were trying to get me into calculus and algebra and science. And I was dyslexic. In high school, I became the yearbook photographer and editor. I discovered the freedom that journalism gave me. I saw that on the runway when the POWs came. The photographers could go there. They're on the roof. They're over there. It gave them an excuse. The camera gave them an excuse. So in high school, I pushed that. It's like, oh my God. And then I didn't want to go. I wanted to go to an art school. I ended up going to the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale. It's like a party school in Fort Lauderdale, A1A on the beach. But I learned. I had to, you had to learn everything from architectural, food, still life, journalism. And they had a thing with the Miami Herald. I had an internship program. And the photographer ahead of me, the class ahead of me in the internship was Carol Guzzi. I don't know if you know who Carol Guzzi is. She's a Washington Post photographer, probably the best photographer in newspaper photography that existed, from my generation. And from there, I did that internship at the Miami Herald. And then I heard that they had this art institute. They had, 10, 15 of these for-profit schools across the country. They had a thing with a school in New York called ICP, the International Center of Photography. They had a scholarship program. And then my editors at the Miami Herald said, you should send your work up there. And I sent my work up there, and I ended up getting a scholarship to New York, to ICP. And you have to understand, it was Cornell Kappa. The school was only, 3 or 4 years old. It was up on 94th Street. But up there, that's where I was exposed to Kappa. I was exposed to Don McCullen, David Douglas Duncan, and I lived at the teachers I had and all that. And an interesting thing. And then I ended up, I needed a job. I had no money. I was poor. You know, I had no money. I wasn't getting any support from my family in the essence of rent or any of that. So I got a job, and I ended up getting a job at Black Star filing slides, but they fired me after a year because I was too slow, but they kept me on. But I learned so much. There was a man, Howard Chapnick, who was he was like established from the 60s, you know, of photojournalism in America, you know.
Was Howard Ben's brother?
Well, one day was cousins. Ben took over, they were cousins, but Howard Chapnick was the real. Ben didn't like the resources that photojournalism took away. He was more into the corporate. Yeah, it was interesting. So, but then the education I got at ICP was weird. I was in this weird program, and there were only two of us. There were only like 10 or 12 of us in the class, and only two of us were into like documentary photojournalism. The rest were like wives of wealthy people in New York and stuff that could afford the class. And one woman for a year, she took pictures of her leg in the bathtub, you know. That's all you look, prints. Every week you would see prints of her legs in the bathtub, sometimes with blood, you know, shaving or whatever. And another woman photographed just body parts of horses. So so long story short, I go to the Philippines in 81, and I'm going to try to document. So I went into these bordellos outside the base, and I was going to shoot black and white infrared film with an infrared strobe, because I had learned that at ICP about shooting infrared, so you can shoot in total darkness. You create an infrared strobe. So I did this thing on these GIs, these military and these sex places, you know, getting blowjobs, all kinds of stuff. But I shot it in a kind of like a Mark Cohen way now. It was like I did a lot of chopping of heads. I didn't want to show the girls. I wanted to show the men. So I cropped a lot of the heads off. There's a lot of weird cropping. So whatever. So when I got back to ICP, it was the first time ever they would talk about my photograph. Originally, I was doing stuff on the subway in the South Bronx. Not very dangerous.
Subway, your first big essay, was it?
Well, yeah, it was. Well, it's because I was a student, and I wanted to become a war photographer. I couldn't tell anybody I wanted to be a war photographer, but I realized I had to understand fear. How do you get over fear? So the subway was the most dangerous place in New York, and I used to go out at night. I would ride up into the Bronx at night on the number 6 train. It's extremely dangerous. I wanted to challenge myself. I needed to find this little skinny white kid going up to the South Bronx. So that's what started at ICP, but they weren't really even that interested in the pictures. My teacher, this guy named Metz, Gary Metz, or I think that's his first name. He took me on to Helen Levitt, her work, because I was photographing children in the South Bronx and stuff. But they would talk around 15 minutes about my pictures and then leave. And then they would spend 2 hours on the legs in the bathtub. So I was very proud of what I did in the Philippines. I printed it in the darkroom. I went back to Black Star and went to see Howard. He brought me in the conference room. He said, "Welcome back. How did it go? Show me what you did." Was standing next to him in the conference room on this light table where he would look at photographers' work. And he went through the pictures, and he looked at me, and I could see he wasn't happy. And he pulled the trash bin, the waste bin, from under the light table, and he took the prints, around 15 of them, and he put them in the waste bin.
No way.
Yeah, in front of me. And he said, "Do you think that's good photography?" And I was speechless. And he says, "Chris, you're going to have to decide. You're going to have to decide between uptown and downtown. Uptown meaning art photography, ICP galleries, or downtown photojournalism, pictures that we can sell." He said, "We can't sell this. There is nothing we can do with this. You're going to have to choose." And what they want was a very formulated thing. You go into a country, an example, my first country. It's the method for photojournalism. You can apply it even today. This is a good learning tool. It's what Susan Meiselas did in Nicaragua. It's a formula where you pick a region in the world that has some kind of peg. And for me, it's easy to peg to America because we have over 100 territories around the earth. America is everywhere. So all you have to do is pick a region. I picked the Philippines. It has a dictator, martial law. It has U.S. military presence, and it has a communist and an Islamic insurgency, all on an island. So embed yourself early, document that place for 2 or 3 years. And when I say document it, you you first research, you pick the anniversaries in that country. When is their Independence Day? What are their military anniversaries? What are that? Because that's when you can go up and you go in and you go to these events and you can photograph the heads of states, the generals, all the top leaders in the society go to these events, military parades. You arm yourself with a 302A with a teleconverter so you can do headshots of Noriega or Putin or whatever. It's the kind of pictures that Salgado's not doing. It's the kind of pictures Noctway is not doing. It's the kind of pictures Gilles Perez is not doing. These are pictures that you need to, it's what the magazines want. They want headshots. So you apply this formula to a country and you do it from the top down. You do it to all the way down to the poorest of the poor, the people that are picking in the garbage dumps. You go to the polo clubs. You document the polo clubs. You meet people. You immerse yourself into a society, and voila, you have 100, 200 beautiful chromes on a nation and a society, and you're going to be able to sell it. It's the same with Ukraine, any of these places that you go to. So it's a certain formula. I did that all through the 80s and became quite successful because I applied it to the Philippines, which I knew. I was advised everybody was going to Beirut and El Salvador in the early 80s. Nicaragua, El Salvador, Beirut, Iran-Iraq war, Afghanistan, very dangerous. Somebody told me, says, Chris, go to the Philippines. And the Philippines blew up in 86. And basically that kind of kickstarted my career. Fast forward to 1990, Time offers me a contract, which was like the golden ticket. And the reason they offered it me, prior to that, Jim was their main photographer, Jim Noctway. And he was doing everything. But Jim, all of a sudden in 89, started doing a lot of work for National Geographic. He wanted to move on. He wanted to do longer projects. Basically, the pollution in Eastern Europe and Romania and stuff. He was unavailable. So they needed a new kind of who can we get to go somewhere? And who knows how to get in? Because that's the other thing. It's not only are they choosing you because they like your photography. They're choosing somebody that they know can get into Yemen and get out of Yemen, where there's no airports and there's no entry, no visas. How do you do that? How do you get into these places? So that's the key, is once you have convinced them that you are good at this craft of living, this, like I call it the Graham Greene novel, the quiet American or whatever, that you can penetrate and get material out, you're pretty set. The problem is also you have photographers that can do that, but aren't really good photographers. I've had a lot of photographers, they put themselves in, let's say, these extreme situations where they could easily lose their life. You're basically putting yourself next to man, trying to kill another man, you can get hurt. And they don't know what they're doing photographically. They don't understand the tool. They don't understand the camera. You have to be able to work your camera with your eyes closed, And people also don't understand with conflict photography. The tip of the spear theoretically is the most dangerous, but that's a false complacency in conflict. Especially now it's even expanded out. But for me, it was always a 30-kilometer radius. Once I got into 30 kilometers of that area, I knew that at any minute, my life can be snuffed away, even while sleeping. Anything can tear through your apartment window or roof or whatever. So it's a real kind of like psychological journey that you have to learn to prepare yourself with, which is that bit of training to understanding fear. I had an incident in the Philippines when Marcos was overthrown, where I was chased by a mob into a house. And when I got out of that, I was almost killed. And Alan Tannenbaum, a photographer, he saw me and he grabbed me and he shook me and almost wanted to slap me in the face and said, hey, you got to snap out of it. Either that or go home. It's hard to see your fingers and see f-stops on a camera when you think you're going to die. Your eyes can't focus. It's just not going to happen. You become like that man in Private Ryan, the film, when he's bouncing around, when they're having him bring the ammo back and forth. You don't want to become that person.
Was there a lot of emotional fatigue?
Yeah, a lot of emotional fatigue and preparing yourself before and all that. But basically, so after gym, time it took off. And prior to that, December, I ended up going down to Panama when the invasion happened. There were only 4 photographers in country, and 3 of them were wounded. One of those was killed. So for several days, I was the only Western photographer working in Panama. And then right after that, I saw that what I did, and now that it had raised me on a pedestal where all of a sudden because I had these heroes in my life that I looked up, and we all are photographers. We're all down there as a kid. Even at Black Star, nobody was paying any attention to me. Howard, even after the Philippines, I was still like the kid in the library. He had to realize he had Noctway, he had Tony Swa, he had the Turnley brothers. I was just like the kid in the library. I was kind of ignored. But after Panama, it kind of like changed. It was mainly, Grazie Neri, everybody. I realized, wow, that was easy. It was like now I've kind of like stepped off the ladder. I'm now recognized. It's like, wow, how did that happen? Yeah. So it just put this kind of like internal pressure on me, like, okay, here we go. And then the next thing was the U.S. military is going to, Saddam Hussein, I went to Liberia after that. And then Saddam invades Kuwait, finds out the U.S. military they're going to create this super pool. They're going to create this pool system for covering the war. And they're going to embed 4 photographers, just 4, on the extreme tip of the spear, 2 with the Marines and 2 with the Army. Now you've got hundreds of journalists, but they're only going to allow and I ended up getting picked with one to be the Marines. And, and just going through all the prep and being in the desert and the trench warfare and working and all that, I basically pushed myself. I realized, okay, this is like a Robert Capa moment. I can't fuck this up. The night before the kickoff in Kuwait, I'm with a unit. They've got 10 of those amphibious track vehicles. We're going to lose 3 on the first day. Everybody will be killed in each vehicle. That's 100 Marines are going to die on the first thing. It's just numbers. You're going to attack 200,000 entrenched supposed Iraqis in trenches. So which vehicle are you in? Where are you going to ride? Who are you going to die next to? That kind of stuff. They even bring a guy to do a will. You have to sign all this stuff. So you're prepared. You train with the guy I train with the guy with a shotgun who goes into the trench for the first day. But then I realized they're not dismounting. I'm on top of the vehicle and I saw a Humvee with the Marine, the gunny sergeant who was riding around next to the lead tanks with these Humvees that had tow weapons on top. I realized I need to be on the roof of that Humvee. I don't want to be in an armored vehicle. I actually always rode on the roof. I refused to stay inside. I had saw what happened inside in Saudi and Khafji when the Iraqis came in and they attacked and the Marines had to go in and push them out. And I went in there and I saw these armored vehicles. And I opened the door to one of those armored vehicles and on the door, the armored vehicle is an arm, a charred arm. And inside you see the faces of these skulls screaming. And I'm like, what the, and they're in an American equipment. The Saudis are in American APCs, and they just turned into little Christians. Like, oh my God, I don't want to be in there. So I'm going to ride on the roof. So even in 2003, when I did it, I wrote on the roof. I'm not getting in. I at night or during dust storms, I might get inside, but I want to be on the roof. Let me jump off or get blown up, whatever. It's a long story. So, but yeah, I had that. I've always had that. That was the intensity that I was putting it into the search. Long story short is then here comes Yugoslavia. I'm on my way, a bit of Tibet. I was trained a lot by Gilles Perez. Gilles Perez in the late, and working in Colombia and in Panama and stuff. I met Gilles Perez and got to be good friends with him in the late 80s. And he's the one who told me, look, this contract you're going to get with time, it's either going to ruin you as a photographer or it could make you. He said, use it as a grant. And that comes back to that bit of with Howard, that thing, if you shoot in a certain way, it's just going to ruin your career. So I've always had that kind of in the back of the head, always kind of shooting for myself. It's like when I morphed into politics and I did the My America, it's like none of that book, Time doesn't need any of those pictures. So they don't need any of that. I give the 30% of what, the headshots and all that stuff. But then the next 70% I'm going to shoot for myself. I didn't come to that formula till much later because, it was once you had digital, you could understand. It's like having a Polaroid. You understand what you're getting. But then fast forward into, this thing with Gilles. And after, I had been married. I missed that. It was, somebody from a Colombian woman, Jacqueline Escalar, who I'd met in school in Fort Lauderdale. She followed me up and went to ICP. She a year behind me, basically, and ended up getting a job at Black Star and job at Newsweek. But my original plan was her and I would travel. She would do video and I would do stills. The video footage, like in Panama, where she was with me, but she wasn't able to film, I did the filming because also she determined that's when she realized she didn't want to do this because she didn't want to die. And she realized she was married to a madman who was willing to kill himself for video or whatever. Long story short, after the Gulf War came out, she divorced me. She left me and she left me for Gilles, kind of like one of my best friends. So I was kind of like, I was thrown for a loop. It was kind of like it became this thing of like fear where I couldn't see the hands in front of my face. So Time saw that and they sent me, Marianne Golan and Michelle Stevenson, they sent me to Paris to do a story on Paris. And I went to Paris, and then from there, they sent me to do the year after the war in Kuwait to do the oil fires, the famous Salgado pictures. They wanted me to go back, and I was in the airport in Heathrow, and I see this photographer with a blue donkey bag, and he walks up to me and he says, "You're Christopher Morris." And again, it becomes that thing. It's like, how does this guy even know who I am? And it's Paul Lowe. And he says, I'm on my way to Yugoslavia. There's a war on Slovenia, and I'm going to fly to Zagreb and rent a car. And there's two cities he's mentioned to me I've never even heard of. I never heard of Zagreb. I'd never heard of Ljubljana. And he tells me, oh, it's just next to Italy, next to Trieste. And then because of my American ignorance, I can't place it. I can place Belgrade. I can place Sarajevo just because of the Olympics and stuff. But he says there's a war there. It just started. It's on the border with Austria and Italy. And so I don't get on the plane to Kuwait. I get on the plane to Yugoslavia with Paul. And so Paul was my introduction to Yugoslavia. And we basically went to the border area, and that's where I photographed my first death of Yugoslavia in the start. And then I stayed around a week, and then I left and did the oil fires, and then went back to the beginning to start the Croatian War, which at this point, because of losing my wife, I had a lot to prove to myself, to my father, and to Howard Chapnick and the people in the industry that I'm going to do war photography like, I'm going to say it now. I was really ready to kill myself. And sadly, I took Ron Habib along for the ride. And initially I had to stop working for Ron because he started working for Newsweek, and Time was upset that his pictures, shoulder to shoulder, we can't do that. Fast forward, I did the whole 6 months of that war. I would do 3 weeks, month, go to New York for a week, look at film, pick up new film, and go back. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And each time I left New York, I prepared my apartment for my mom. Meaning, I didn't want her. I remember I had some pornography, some VHS tapes, and I remember I would throw them away. Anything like that. I didn't want anybody to find anything, mainly my mother. Anything in my life that I didn't want her to see. So when you do that, when you leave an apartment, each time, and you lock the door, and I'm not saying I only did it once, threw it away once, but I'm saying each time you locked your apartment door and you looked inside, I would leave it as if I was not coming back. And I'm not saying I did that throughout my career. I'm saying I did that in the Croatian part of the Yugoslavia, the first 6 months. Fast forward to Vukovar, the end of the war, November. This is the key where I realized I had found that Colonel Kurtz moment. I had found that heart of darkness. And what I learned frightened me. It frightened me that all mankind has this murderous, societal, violent nature of hatred where they can kill. They can kill. Everybody has it. And there was an incident where the people were coming out of the basements. They'd been under siege and the Serbs had just captured it. Outside the city, the Yugoslav army had a cordon around it, and they let loose the psychopaths, the rapists and murderers, to clean it. And they do that everywhere. That's what armies do. They're really, that's why you see what happened in Bucha. It's that kind of stuff. So in Vukovar, you could hear the gunshots, and I literally ended up next to a guy who shot a guy in front of me. Basically, I've seen the pictures now. I've now just started scanning it. I'm doing something as we speak. I'm supposed to have this audio recorded on this experience today. I'm behind deadline. So I'm looking at these pictures now, and that's why I have this clarity of thought where this man from 2 meters executes somebody. And around him are other dead people that are lying on the ground. Well, I'm at an execution spot. I've entered a spot on the planet Earth where man is face to face, just snuffing them out. And I'm standing next to him with a camera. And I can't pick my hand on my camera and take a picture. Because I realize if I do that, I'm going to be possibly on the ground and I'm going to lose everything in my thing. And after this gunman sprayed around 6 bullets into the chest and the stomach of this guy, he turns to me and he's literally face to face. I could smell his breath, this alcohol-fueled evil. He looked at me without a word, but his eyes said, "What are you going to do about that?" He knew I was an American. He knew I was Western. And Ron heard the shots and came running up to me. And I told him what happened, and let's get away. Let's back off. These people are executing these people. And later that night, Ron said to me, that he would never allow that to happen again, where if he's in that situation where they shoot somebody, he's going to try to document it. Fast forward a month or so later, in Bellinia, where Ron made that picture, the most important picture of the war, of the guy with a cigarette kicking the body. You know. But Zach, what happened to me after that, of going back to Belgrade, and what I had witnessed that day, November 18th in 91 in Vukovar, when I made it to the Hyatt Hotel in Belgrade, when I walked and I went into the elevator, and when I made it to the door of my room and my hand touched the doorknob, I started to weep uncontrollably because my fingers were so sensitive to the touch of the metal that I could feel this energy coming off the door handle. And I realized I had my arm, I had my hand, and I had seen so much that day of death, and I couldn't believe that I was alive. I ended up going into the bathroom, and I discovered that I was covered in lice from the dead people. I was standing near the hospital. There was a field of dead people, and I was photographing all these dead like a police photographer. And I was covered in lice. And I remember getting into the bathtub. And this is life that had been feeding off of the lice that had been feeding off of bodies. And I crawled into this bathtub and I wept. And I realized I didn't want to, I found it. I found that Colonel Kurtz moment. I found those people with no empathy. This is what I discovered. All of us, we must teach empathy. It must be taught. Our children must be taught empathy. Empathy. Because without it, all of us can be pushed to the extermination of others. And we don't realize it. I see it, seeing it happening in this country. So, and then what's interesting is I want it off. That's it. I don't want to do it anymore. The next day, I drove the 12 hours to Zagreb to get with my girlfriend at the time, Vesna, and we went to Venice to ship film. I'm done. I don't want to go back to war. Now, granted, Ron calls me a few weeks later, says, Chris, I'm with Archon. We're going to be going into Bellinia. I says, I'm not going. I'm not going to cover Bosnia. I don't want to do it. But like a hamster on the wheel, you can't get off. So basically that was the peak. That November of 91 was where I realized I really didn't want to do this pursuing the man with gun anymore. But if you look at my career, I continued up and all the way up until 2011 with Libya was the last time, you know.
Was this the beginning of your post-traumatic stress, do you think?
This real post-traumatic stress didn't come until I really started examining my archive. I didn't want to be known as a war photographer. When in 98, you know, my daughter was born, my first daughter, and I was still doing war. And in 99, I had to go back to Chechnya. And I just recently found this roll of film, a roll of film of my daughter, a year and a half old, in a Samsonite suitcase surrounded by boxes of film. Hundreds of rolls of film. I was de-shelling them. And I remembered I told my wife I was not going to go to the front. I was just going to do the refugees. I was, you know, going back to do the Second Chechen War, 1999. What the fuck am I doing?
But in 95, you were in Chechnya as well.
95, 96.
That stuff was really in your face as well.
Yeah. I always pushed the legacy of what a war photograph was. Dmitry Balterman's, the Don McCullen, the soldier throwing the hand grenade, Raymond Dupordon, the Christian militia fighter going down the street in Beirut. It's that kind of like GoPro perspective. You have to be next to the gunman, and it's not easy. In my work, I've always said it. It wasn't about the civilians. It wasn't about the victims. I set out to document in a very selfish way the man with the gun. I call it now the idiot with the gun. Man trying to kill man. What I've discovered is in finding all these returns that I'm going through is I didn't just photograph the man with the gun. I did photograph society. I did photograph everything. It's just nobody has seen it because nobody was looking for it. Yeah, I'm just discovering so much more, but I'm also discovering, trying to analyze more. You know, the whole thing of how eventually I wanted to run away from war photography was after that incident, this final incident in 99 where I was almost killed. I called Time and said, when I got back to Moscow, find me something else. And that's when they assigned me politics during the recount with Bush and Gore, and then the elections. And then I was assigned the White House. It's a man in a suit. It was something that, to be honest with you, I dreaded. I actually even have a picture of Cornel Kappa when he first brought me to ICP, and he's showing me his work of Kennedy, the first 100 days. And I remember while he was showing it to me thinking, oh my God, that's the most boring photography I've ever seen. It's just a man in a suit in a room. I don't want to do that. I was looking for that Dennis Hopper in Vietnam, or Cambodia.
Someone looked back at your archive who didn't know you from the 80s to 2003, 4. What kind of person do you think they would imagine you were?
No, I've never really thought about that. What would they think? I don't know. I would think that they would think he was a foolish man, a foolish man to do that. It's a very voyeuristic thing, Zach. I don't have this illusion that all my peers have, that Jim has, that other colleagues has, of saving society and exposing things. I haven't had that. I understand pictures cause change, but a lot of times pictures cause negative change. Pictures cause wars. Pictures can be used by governments for their own propaganda purposes. Even I'm understanding now how my work was used to promote this colonialist empire of America's might. My work was used for propaganda. I was part of that machine, but when I look at my work, I know I was there as an outside observer. It leaves the picture editor's control. I'm the original capture, but then it goes to a picture editor who decides what to show an editor. And then an editor decides what he wants to show the public, what message they want to put on the cover. So there's a real kind of disconnect. At least there used to be, It's even now. Let's say you're working for the New York Times. What image is the New York Times going to be published? So there's great collaboration, but there's great stuff to analyze. But I had a bad taste about the industry on the sense of the journalistic part of it. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to run away from it. And the only war work that I paid any attention to was pretty much the Chechen work through my White House years and all that. I wanted to run away from it. And then eventually I did 9 years. So Obama became elected and I was excited. I thought, oh my God, it's going to be a great presidency. But in 2009, Time was sold and they decided they weren't going to cover the White House anymore. And so 2009, I took like a 90% pay cut overnight. I had to scramble for clients and stuff because I had put all my, when I wasn't working, I just wouldn't work for anybody because I didn't want to work. I wanted time with my children. I'm talking
I think for me, your time as a conflict photographer to me and to everybody else was evident of what you put in, what you sacrificed and stuff. But I've always been intrigued by you. All of that time you spent as a war photographer, where did it leave you? And obviously that's what we're looking at and talking about in this conversation, and where it left you as a person, as a photographer. I started to see, I don't know, I felt my America and the Americans. I think you sort of found authorship in your work. For me, I just thought, this is the real Christopher Morris.
I have dyslexia, and the way my mind always compartmentalized things, the way of wanting to it's constantly trying to eliminate visual pollution in what I'm looking at. If I'm trying to read something, I have to have the book isolated because of the visual pollution of a painting on the wall or something. My mind is always trying to deal with visual pollution. What the real kind of discovering, this is important because you deal with photography. Once I started at the White House, I didn't kind of know what am I going to do photographically, and this is still pre-digital. I didn't go digital till 2003. So the first few years is still shooting film, and you're going from tungsten to daylight. It was a nightmare. So long story short is myself and Ron, we get an advertising assignment from Ogilvy and Mather for IBM. It's an incredible assignment. Each get 10 portraits, 10 subjects at $10,000 a portrait. So it's like, whoa, that's $100,000. You're telling me you're going to pay me $10,000 to do a portrait? It's like, what the heck? So long story short, my first meeting, this guy, John McVeigh, we're up in New Hampshire. We're going to do the inventor of the Segway. And Dean Kagan is the night before. And he calls me in my room. He says, can you meet me downstairs in the lobby? I want to talk to you before the client comes down. And I meet him downstairs. It's this young guy, and I'm already established. In my 40s, here comes this young guy in his 30s. He looks at me. He says, hi, Chris. So happy to meet you. So happy to work with you. But I need to get something. I need to tell you something. The client really loves your work. That's why you're here. But honestly, I think you're a terrible photographer. And it's why we don't use photojournalism. And he says it's your lens choice. He says photojournalists rely too much on distortion to tell their story. So just be aware of that going forward. I'm not happy with any distortion. We only use wide angle for humor. He says, go back and study the masters. So for the next week, I'm working with this guy. I'm kind of like freaked out. And then I went back and analyzed, and it's true. So in 1989, prior to 89, as a film photographer, you had to have 3 or 4 cameras because you did not have any zooms. The only zoom was a 24 to 35 3.5 aspherical by Canon. It's like, why am I going to carry that? So you had to carry a 24, a 28, a 35, a 50, an 85, a 135, and a 200. That's a lot of weight. 1989, a revolution happened. Canon comes out with this magical 20 to 35. And there, hence, begins the 90s photojournalism trend of what I call the Salvador Dali distortion of reality of the world. So all this crying about, and I'm not a wide angle because you can look at Gilles Perez, Telex Iran. It's all shot pretty much on a 28. Even my Subway in New York City, the only lens I'm using is a 20 millimeter. It's how you learn to use it. And the reason I did that is because I grew up with skateboarding, and it's like the first lens I bought was a 20 after the kit 50. But whatever, it made me realize that. And at the White House, I realized I would never shoot anything below 40 millimeter. And because what happens is with the human eye, when you look at something with a normal lens, it's hard to, what do I do with that? It looks boring. Well, it looks boring because it's human vision. It's the vision you've had since birth, and it looks boring. But the minute you look at it with a 28 or 30, it's different. It's different. It's not real. And it's the people thinks it's the width is the problem. It's not the width. It's the depth. It's from foreground to middle ground to background. There's the optical thing that makes a picture stand the test of time. And the best area I found, the human eye depth is around 65 millimeter. And the peripherals around the 40, 41, something like that. So with that in mind, that's how My America was born. I would only photograph with that vision and attempt and that style. And it just kind of fit me better. I took great pride in, like, you look at a Gregory Kretzen picture or a Stephen Shore picture, or pictures that look like they were on a tripod, these big 10-8 things. I was trying to do that, like my tree agent, garage agent, I have 3 seconds to make that picture. I've got an agent pulling on me saying, we can't stop here. I got to get in the motorcade. That book was made with me trying to slow everything down and isolate people to create a mood. Working in symbolisms and metaphors is the beauty for me of photography. I hate captions. But they are important, but I hate captions.
Were you influenced by John Huston at all, or Fritz Lang, or?
No. It was more of that Gregory Kretzen, that loneliness of despair, of isolation. I would listen to a lot of music too. In the times you're covering certain things, I wear headphones. It's like I put myself into a film. I became fascinated with this whole thing of, you're trying to trap a viewer. Okay. You want them to stop on your image. You have to trap them. So you have to trap them with composition. If you leave, you have to build some kind of circular movement through the frame that's not going to allow the viewer to want to leave. Even if it's a picture of a coffee cup next to on a table, you can trap the viewer with such you look at Eggleston, you look at the simplicity, Larry Sultan, he has a picture of his parents. There's a picture of his mother's hand on the wallpaper. That picture makes me cry. I can stare at it and cry. And it's just a picture of a hand on a wallpaper. I really love that in photography. I love that where you can, and then to try to get a message across, but my message is not necessarily your message. You want people to kind of feel and go through the image.
How did you perceive that sort of pageantry and that whole rhetoric of American politics when your life had been spent in war zones to this sort of surreal, almost corporate environment?
What shocked me about the Republican world and covering this American this pageantry around Bush and the presidency, because even then I called him a dear leader. It's very cult-like when the president comes out on stage and the people, they stare at him, they're in awe. And I couldn't understand it, especially when you hear the stuff he's saying and you realize he's lying to you. I used to sit under the stage and listen to Bush. I'm right under that podium in the buffer, hours and hours of speeches, and you realize he's lying. You really know he's lying because you've heard stuff and it's being told to the world. And now you fast forward to this administration, it's off the charts. It's like, how can you hold a straight face? How can not this stuff be called out?
When you think about what you just said in respect to My America, was it a form of critique then?
Yeah, it was absolutely a critique. Absolutely a critique. America is not white. America is not white. That book is a white America, a white corporate perfect. No trash, no people in wheelchairs. I would go to a Hillary Clinton event. You got people in Birkenstocks, tie-dye shirts. I couldn't photograph it. It was a mess. Trash on the ground. The Republican world, it doesn't exist anymore, that world. It's gone. Trump destroyed it. That MAGA is not that world that My America is in. That was that white Christian nationalist, kind of the whole cult of personality. Any nation is susceptible to it.
Was that period a sort of closure for you, or was it an added discomfort to the?
Well, to be honest, no. It became a closure not by choice. I wanted to continue it. I would have loved to have been covering Trump. Flying on Air Force One, traveling the world with the president. I would like to have carried that into my retirement. It didn't happen, which ended up my style of work. This is an interesting story. So I'm going to back you up right after I went to Somalia in 91, 3 times during the fighting when nobody was there. And then one of the first to go during the famine. And the only reason I went to do the famine was because I did the war part and Time asked me, could I get back into Somalia? I go back into Somalia and I go to a place called Baidoa. And we're talking, there were maybe 3 or 4 aid workers there at that time. It was in the summer. And we're looking around several hundred people a day were dying in this town, this desert town. And when Enrico and I showed up, this Italian photographer, you have to understand we are white, and you've got hundreds of people that have been walking for months through the desert looking for food. They see you. They run to you. And they run to you not to have your picture taken. They're running to you for help, for food and water. So to arrive in this town was probably my greatest, experience of I'll never do that again. Even far worse to me emotionally than what happened to me in Vukovar with the extermination. Because you end up trying to photograph these people, adults, children, and they look at you in the eye and you're focusing on their eyes and they are dying. They are dying in front of you. Their diarrhea is pouring out of their behinds on the ground. They're lying in their puddles of pudding and flies. And where do I eat? What do I eat? Where do I sleep? Where are we going to sleep in this desert town? They had the fight. They had the bodyguard. They had a restaurant in Baidoa and was actually called the Bikini Restaurant. Had a little sign with a little palm tree on it for the fighters. And we sat on these. It had like a meter high earthen wall around this little restaurant in Baidoa. And I say restaurant, whatever. It's a building. It's in the desert. It's in Baidoa. We're sitting on these wooden tables and they bring out the food. They bring out pasta. The Somalis eat a lot of pasta because of their Italian heritage. But next to the wall, there's probably 30, 40 people staring. Some of them older, wrapped in the blanket. Their children peering over the walls. Few of the children are inside the restaurant area around the tables. Now these are gunmen. They're eating. These guys all have their guns. And I couldn't eat the food because it was covered in flies. And the flies are on dead people. And the dead people are just outside there on the street. So my stomach got a little sick. And the gunmen, my bodyguards, they took my food and they ate it. And what they didn't finish, there was a young boy or girl, I don't even know the sex, that was on the ground next to me. It kind of looks like that famous picture of Jim's from Somalia, from Baidoa, that he did like a month later, of somebody crawling. I've got this kid next to me. Basically, the guy, he scraped the food onto the ground. And I watched this person eat the spaghetti out of the sand. And the whole group came up like scouring. I made it into my little hut where I was going to sleep, this little mud building room. I had a room in there with Enrico, and I had a little stove and I cooked myself some instant oatmeal. And in the morning, there was a crowd of people that sat outside my hut. When I say a crowd, I don't know, 10 or 15. In the morning, when I got up to go out, they were dead. They were dead. So here I'm waiting for the wheelbarrow guy, with a UNICEF wheelbarrow guy, to come up and collect the dead in the pile. Some of them are still alive, but they're dead. Their eyes are open. They're covered in flies. And then when I remember at one point I had this girl, she wouldn't let go of my pants. She would not let go of my pants. I couldn't walk. She had like a death grip on my pants. And I had to peel her fingers off my pants and walk away. And I never, ever, ever wanted to do that again. And I told time I would never photograph famine ever again. Never. There's other people that can go do that and go on television and win awards and document that, but it's not for me. It's like this whole bit of exploitation.
It's a perversity, isn't it?
Yeah, but the document, you can't say it has to be done. It still has to be documented, but at one point it just pushes you harder. That's why for me, it would just give me the guys with the guns. They're idiots with guns. I don't cry when they die in front of me or get wounded in front of me. I don't cry for them. I lose no sleep for them.
There's obviously a lot of things within you, turmoil.
Yeah, I have a lot of trauma. I have a lot of PTSD. I had ignored it and I deal with it. I've never had therapy. It was very interesting. I was never offered counseling all my years at time. No one's ever said, hey, do you need help? It was never asked. Because, it's kind of like, if you ever come back and say, look, I think I need some help, then they're never going to send you again either,
It's also making sense of the help as well.
Yeah, and making sense. I feel I'm doing better on my own self-diagnosis and kind of understanding. You can see on some of my ventings, on my postings, on my Instagram, how I feel about certain things and certain issues about man and society and photography. Photography is so important to document reality, especially now with AI. What is real?
Going back to My America, is there a continuation of that with what would the post-Trump, post-pandemic landscape look like now if you did this sequel to that book?
It is darker. It's meaner. It's more exposed. It's like if anybody wants to look, if you start with My America, just switch over and then go to Peter Van Atmel's book. Peter Van Atmel, he's kind of stripped away the veneer of what this country is. He kind of followed after me of continuing to document. But I feel that the fact that they reelected this man with all that was known about him, it really, to me, exposes who Americans truly are. And I'm ashamed of it. And I'm even estranged from pretty much all my family, my relatives. It comes down to that thing of lack of empathy. When I was like 10 or 11, I had a BB gun here in Florida, and my friends, we went out shooting. And I had an incident where I ended up shooting a bird. My friends were shooting birds. I ended up standing over this bird. And these older kids I were with, they were very proud of me. They were jumping up and down that I hit it. They were kind of like celebrating the death of this bird. And I remember standing over this little blue bird and watching its wings flutter. And its eye looked at me. It just looked at me. And I had such pain of loss of life, but I couldn't express it because of my friends. I had to stay in this macho male dominant, I'm a killer. But I never got over that. I could never kill again. I could never kill anything. I don't own a gun. I have a hard time, even with insects, killing insects. I have to let them go. It becomes such a empathy of life, even gardening, even pulling weeds out of the ground and cutting trees. It's life. It causes me some pain. And what society has done, empathy is weakness. Empathy is weakness. We're taught that empathy is wrong. That's the problem. That to me is the key. Raise your children with utmost of empathy of others. I have empathy for Trump people. I have empathy for people I don't like. I have empathy for the killer that was next to me that took somebody's life, that how he ended up with such hatred that he could kill his neighbor. There's such hatred of others. Don't like fat people. Don't like trans people. Who cares? Who cares? Let everybody be, leave them alone, Whatever. That to me has become this kind of like deep sensitivity of myself. I have such a deep archive. You have no idea the amount of material I've had of how many dead children I've photographed, mutilated. And it just goes on, when Ukraine started, like everybody, I got to go. I couldn't tell my wife I was planning on going. I was going to buy a car in Poland and drive in. I was teaching some high school students up in New Orleans, and I had to delay a trip. And then one night, Mariupol happened, the hospital on CNN, and I couldn't believe it. There it was live on CNN. They're bringing out a dead baby and they're broadcasting it. Oh my God, finally they're going to shock people. There it is. And then after that comes on the TV, is one of the Turnley brothers. I believe it was David. It could have been Peter. I think it was David, with Anderson Cooper, and they're talking about his pictures. His pictures. I got so violently ill that I actually went in the bathroom and threw up. I could not believe what was on TV, that they went from that to that. Some photographer talking about himself. It just disgusted me. And then that night, Zach, I laid to go to sleep, and I had the most horrific dream of my life. It was images of children that I stood over, but they were alive, and they were coming at me, screaming. And I immediately woke up, and I didn't sleep for 2 days. My wife, she told me to check into a hospital. It was that bad. And I had to question myself, why? Why was I going to go back to Ukraine to photograph another dead child? So yeah, it's been hard. It's, I realize, and the message in the dream, what they were yelling at me is I did nothing. I did nothing with their pictures. I left them alone in a box under a bed, never to be seen by anybody. The horror and tragedy that was brought upon them, that mutilated their faces and snuffed them out. It was this horrid dream, and I couldn't go back to sleep because I didn't want to see them again. It was so real. And the ironic thing is I was working with high school kids in a cemetery making a vampire movie, and me being the consultant. So the imagery I was having to deal with was just mind-boggling. So in the end, I didn't go to.
Have you ever thought of permanently deleting all them legs?
No, that would hurt me more to delete them. Because to me, they're a true document of man, of what he does to his own people. So it's like now with this Yugoslavia, I've developed a system where I'm going to scan everything. I'm going to scan 50, 60,000 images, because now I have AI that can help me assemble it. It can identify every boy, it can even identify things that caused me trauma. How was I going to catalog these images? Well, it's now kind of simple in the sense of you link the audio and the text together. It's, whatever. I'm developing something and working on something to make this all accessible. It's also why I don't have a website. I pulled off my website.
There's not a platform with your journey on.
No, I've pulled it all off because I realized it wasn't right. I have not done anything new on Instagram that has not already been seen, because I realize that I'm releasing it kind of in the wrong way. I'm actually doing these. I have around 13 different archive books I'm trying to design that I want to have published. These like catalog books.
That's a fair shot. Yeah. I was devastated that there isn't anywhere really to celebrate you, because it's fragmented everywhere.
The only place that my work is on my Instagram.
Yeah, exactly what you're saying. Yeah, and I think what you're saying is absolutely right. You need to get it lumped all in one place.
Yeah, and the problem is it was like, I don't want to, it's like Gilles Perez. I don't know if you've seen his new book on Northern Ireland or had a chance to sit down and flip through it. It's the most stunning book I've ever seen. And it's just this anthropological study of that time period. It's brilliantly done. And I realized that, yeah, I don't need to be showing all this stuff that I've done. Like I've said, I've scanned so much stuff, and I could be uploading something new and creative 5 times a day, if I want, but I just don't want it. I am trying to redesign our website, but it's difficult for me because I straddle war, politics, fashion, kind of like celebrity, and it's hard. How do you put that all in a design?
Well, would you start at the present and work backwards, maybe?
No, not even, because the thing is, for me, I'm not looking for work. I'm not a website. It depends on what's the purpose of a website. It's not like I'm having a website, so I'm going to get work.
No, but I think
Not-
there's a lot of things you could speak about on that website because I want to know.
Yeah.
I'm sure lots of people want to know. You've had one incredible journey, mate.
The more into the thing is, Zach, I think more important for me would actually have almost like a YouTube channel that's my channel that deals with history and photography, this overlapping. And I could have episodes on so many things, so many different regions. I don't really like putting myself out there. Something is going to be happening, especially this stuff I'm doing with Kira and trying to create this living archive. I'm supposed to be leaving the next month. I'm bringing 30 to 50,000 images to Sarajevo to do this living archive there at the foundation in Sarajevo. So it's kind of ironic. I'm bringing that material out of my home back to Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, because I want to have the assistants that I'm putting together that are going to work with me on it. I need some people knowledgeable about that region of the world for stuff that I want to feed into the AI for the captioning and the information on the images.
Can we go back to the empathy theme again?
Mm-hmm.
With your second book, your Americans book, was that a way of you showing empathy to the machine?
It was trying to broaden out. I understood that my America was so narrow. It was such a sliver of a section of America that I needed to broaden it out to a broader section of society. And the time I started working for that fashion magazine, they had hired me to do a road trip across America during the census. And they wanted me to go into people's homes and do portraits of people's homes, you know, Asians, Blacks, American Indians. I couldn't use anybody I knew. They had to all be strangers. It was a hard assignment. So some of that is based on there. I made a lot of road trips. And to me, I felt the country was in a state of depression. It was the end of the two wars, you know, were still going on. And the crash in 2008, 2009, the unemployment, and the country was depressed. It was in a depression. And I wanted to kind of pick up on that fear. If I saw a kid on the street and he was playing with a ball and smiling, I wouldn't take his picture. But if I saw him sitting on the street with his hands in his face, I would take his picture. So I'm editorializing, I'm deciding how I'm going to photograph to convey a certain mood. And it was more a mood about depression in my mind, that they had so kindly, blindly believed their dear leader about weapons of mass destruction and everything. And the whole country was basically brought back down to his knees. Very similar to what's going to be happening now. America's about to collapse, you know, all the stuff with the tariffs and everything, and all the roundup of the immigrants, the people that run the country, you know, lack of empathy. You know?
I found it very reminiscent of Paul Fusco's funeral train.
Yes.
Just reminded me of.
I shot out of the car window.
Yeah, they're mourning, and you're almost sort of doing the same thing in a sense with saying they're in a.
It's weird how things you see later you discovered. I didn't really know Paul's work till after I had done it. The same, I don't know if you know that Mark Cohen, Dark Days. I had never seen that work, and I'm selling it. It's like, oh my God. We had the same vision. It's like, I'm copying him, but how can, it's like, it's just like it's kind of like a way of seeing. It's that whole bit when you photograph that whole bit. I left that off, that bit about composition and trapping the viewer. If there's a message I wanted, let's say if it was in the First Lady's diamond necklace and her dress, if I show her eyes, you're never going to see the necklace. You're never going to see the dress because you're going to go to the eyes. So in camera, I would do the eyes, but then I'm like, oh, they're distracted. So I would eliminate the eyes. And then, oh, the nose is bothering. Let me just crop it at the lips. To focus the viewer in, I would do these odd in-camera croppings. And because I wanted to focus people in more on the fashion that they were wearing, which ended up leading to this woman, the editor-in-chief of Amica, wanting to work with me because she loved the way I photographed Republicans. And that's how I ended up going down that rabbit hole of beauty and fashion. I had that thing, I tell you the story of Somalia. When I came out of Somalia, I went back to Paris. I spent a week with Karl Lagerfeld. So I went from that little girl clinging to my pants to hanging out with Karl Lagerfeld in 92. And that's where I was exposed to that fashion world, that beauty, and the amount of money that these people were spending on clothes and handbags and just that whole world. And I remembered when I was there, I had a really, really hard time looking at the people with Karl, he had all these beautiful assistants, these model assistants and stuff. And they were so friendly with me. This long haired kid coming out of Somalia. It was like, who's this? And they were all kind of like fawning over me, but I couldn't look at them. I couldn't look at them because they were too beautiful in the sense of, I would see my victims. If you listen to the song Paint It Black, became like a soundtrack for me. You can't I had to turn away. I wasn't turning away because of any kind of sexuality. I couldn't look at them because I would see their beauty, and then their beauty would be mutilated in my mind. I would have these like dark flashbacks of a young girl that I could see in the back of her head. You know, there's no brain. You can see like a melon and her blonde hair. So when you're looking at somebody and you get these kind of visual flashbacks, you have to turn away. And so I was in that world dancing around it. So all of a sudden, fast forward 2009, 2010, I'm working for a fashion magazine in Paris and Milan and just doing beauty. And, but at that point I had through my politics, I had so detached from the war photographer moniker. I didn't even want, even when we were going to be in Vanity Fair, they had to do a group photograph and I was in a suit and they didn't want me in a suit. They wanted me in like photojournalist clothes. And I said, no, this is what I wear to work. I cover the White House and I refused to change. If you see that photo, I'm in a suit. I didn't want to be in they brought me all these scarves and safari clothing to put on. I'm not going to wear any of that, whatever. I kind of disturbed the photograph. I look at it now, but, I wanted to run away. I didn't want to rely on, I'm a war photographer. And if I'm going to do politics, I want to do it well. And if I'm going to do fashion, I want to try to do it well and not try to rely on the fact that I'm a war photographer. What enabled me to penetrate this whole like celebrity and fashion world was the fact that I had photographed presidents and world leaders. They would see that. And, and the war photographer thing was just more of kind of like a side note to them. It's in a completely other world than those people. They don't really pay attention to that stuff.
You are quite a top drawer fashion photographer though.
If I'm allowed to the problem is with that, a lot of times you're not allowed to do what you kind of want to do, if you're not given the creativity. And the problem is with fashion, I to be honest with you, I wish I was still doing it. But the problem is you have to do it well, you have to invest so much of your own money because if you're working for Vogue's or Elle or any of these fashion magazines, your day rate is just a standard day rate, 500 euro, whatever it is. That's it. And they expect you to pay for everything else, And with fashion, you have to, if you have 10 selects, you better have 10 different outfits. You can't have 10 selects of the same outfit. So it makes it you can't just get your friend to go out and photograph. If you do, what I found hard is you make a beautiful image in this beautiful outfit. That's done. Take it off because you can't make another masterpiece with that same image, that same outfit. And then they're just not going to want it. They're going to want another masterpiece, but it better have some other clothes on. So it's not as easy as you want, in the sense of to style properly. And also with me, I'm also trying to deliver a message in the photography. Again, it has to have some kind of message in what I'm trying to do with the images, even when especially if it's fashion. I just don't want to do pictures of people just wearing clothes. I want to have some kind of message. Where I live here, there's Scientology's headquarters in Clearwater, Florida. And it's like this weird town. I'm dying to do a project in there with some actors to create some scene, but a scene with a message.
Do you enjoy that real ownership of the composition?
I have problems sometimes with clients that end up not working with me again because I don't do well with doing something that I don't really like or want to have my name on it, and trying, battling with somebody. No, I'm going to do it this way. It's like, I'm not the best at that.
This might sound like a crazy question, but you've made a lot of films. You're going back to when you were talking about your flashbacks and your dreams, the turmoil in the head. Is your filmmaking and the way you've been shift lensing, the way you've been playing with frames per second, there's a weird, abstract, surreal element to these videos. Is that a way of you processing these dreams and the way you see the world in your head?
It's trying to slow everything down so you can observe it almost like into a film. I want you to there's so much visual stuff going on. And it's even initially when I first started playing around with the video in 2006, I did this thing called the Dear Leader. It was a little Sanyo. I liked moving images, but there's something about, I just want to analyze the frame. I want to think about what's going on there. I want to see this person walking down the street. So in the essence, I'm just trying to slow down the mind to observe, especially when you're working with that phantom camera or high-speed cameras. You're looking at time just before you've captured time, meaning a single photograph, you stop time. It's like the cover of a book. You stop time. Where the pages, all that flip through a book in your hand, all those other pages are all those other time dimensions. And when I say time dimension, I'm just talking frames per second. Humans see somewhere, I don't know, 24 to 50 frames per second. I don't know what it is, but that's what we see at. And when you start working in these other frame rates, especially in the thousands of frames per second, you realize that the reality is something that we can't see. Just because we're seeing it as things, there are things that are at other frame rates that we can't see. Infinity in either other direction. So you start to pay a lot more attention to trees and the sounds. Also, if you record the audio at that same frame rate, if you record 1,000 frames per second at audio, your 2-second audio clip is now a 5-minute audio file. But there is sound there, and that sound is saying something. It's just not at the wavelength or the frequency that we listen to it. So you start to understand when you record these extreme sounds at different levels, you hear things. It's like the trees are talking. It's like, and you start to understand that life is life, and just because we see it in one way doesn't mean that that's all that's real. I can go off on that, but it's not, it comes down to me, the power of photography. And I think it's lost on everybody of what it is. This magic of us being able to stop time and look at it and analyze it. That's what was so fascinating several hundred years ago when it first was invented. They had never seen that. One of the first things they did, they started photographing their dead children and as like they're alive, setting up these scenes to recreate. It's, and we take it for granted, especially now with phones and everything else. But,
yeah, I was going to ask you about the war stuff. Does the viewer ever really understand what emotion and even the technical elements,
No, everything is kind of lost. I mean, they just become generic. Gaza is a prime example. How many images of, it just looks the same. It becomes ineffective. It's ineffective. If the message is not getting across, something else must be done to get the message across. And the problem is, to get the message across is so vile and so horrific. Western societies won't stand that being allowed to show. It's like gun violence in America. All you got to do is show the police photos of the Sandy Hook school shooting. Publish them. Put them on billboards. Show some 5-6-year-old little girl with her head splayed open up against a blackboard with the brain all there. I'm telling you, that's going to cause change. But we don't want to see reality. We don't want to see reality of some munition that's dropped on 2 Hamas terrorists, but it obliterates 30 other people, turns them into vapor. Their DNA is just splattered all over the wall. It's just criminal. It's criminal. Us in the West, we complain about terrorists and suicide bombers. So you guys are stupid. Stupid. So what? They came in on walked in with a suicide vest and blew themselves on a bus. So what? We sit in MacDill Air Force Base in an air-conditioned room flying some Reaper drone that's going to rip you and your family apart. And then we go to dinner and play with our kids. So the moralities, so yeah. Empathy for the suicide terrorist, come on. We've pushed these people to the edge. What takes a Palestinian to get on a hang glider, fly over a fence, and go start massacring children and other civilians? What pushed that man to that level of insanity? He's going to die. But such hatred, he's lost all empathy for the Jewish people. He has no empathy. The Palestinians aren't teaching empathy to their children because they can't teach them empathy. That's the problem. It's criminal. I saw it in all these Operation Just Cause, all this Restore Hope, all the way we name our military operations. When I embed myself with these soldiers, they're not liberators. They're not liberators. They're conquerors. They're taking out lives. They kill 1,000 to save one. They kill 10,000 to save 100. It's not morally right. There's another way to get rid of Saddam Hussein. There's a much easier way to get Saddam Hussein. And they know how to do it. It's called money. You just pay them. Whatever. I look at my pictures and I get so disgusted. I just get so disgusted about this continuation of and like Ukrainian. I'm all Ukrainian. Defend yourselves. Ukrainians are defending us all from pure evil. You live in that Russian empire. Finally Armenia and Azerbaijan are finally breaking away from that nightmare. So to me, I'm not saying men should not fight. Ukrainians are not idiots with guns. Ukrainians are defending us all. So I need to be clear on that. Sometimes you can be smitten and destroyed. You have to rise up and protect your families, So yeah, that's part of my empathy. But I also have empathy for these poor Russians that have felt themselves into a society that's being led by psychopaths. The same way within America. We are now being led by psychopaths. And who knows what can happen in this country and what this psychopathic government's going to ask our young men to do. What, we're going to invade Norway? Greenland? Panama? Canada? It's stupid.
Thank you. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. It's been really heart-rending a little, listening to you talk about your life as a photographer and how you've connected. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to listen to you.
Yeah, well, good luck in editing it down. But I tried to be as honest as I could, and I had a nickname that I picked up in Somalia that I carried over into Yugoslavia. They called me Mr. Crazy. It was even my radio call sign. And I feel good. I feel like I need to talk at some point. And I realize that I have a lot inside and I'm very isolated. I'm not involved with Seven anymore. It's kind of like a self-imposed exile, so I can concentrate on getting this stuff cataloged and archived. So when I'm dust, that it's there. And that's kind of my,
I'm happy to talk about anything you want. Again, just give me a shout and I'll do so.
Really appreciate it. Okay.
Oh, God, don't
give me a heads up when you can, if you want to start going into looking for pictures, but
definitely.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Christopher. All the best, mate. Take care.
Thank you so much.